one of my favorite stories, not my favorite, just depressing, but I was talking to a psychologist from a university, and she was telling me about a patient. She had a student. She's like, I'm having the hardest time working with this kid because he has freely admitted, I use ChatGPT to write my college entrance exam. I use ChatGPT to do all my assignments at school. I use ChatGPT to help me write stories and jokes I can tell when I go out with people. She said, this kid wasn't here. There was nobody there. He had no idea who he is, what he wanted to do. He was just farming out his entire identity formation to a machine, and he had nowhere to go from there.
Hello, moms, dads, and grands, and welcome back to M4L Academy. If you're new here, you can think of us as school for parents, grandparents, and friends who are committed to defending liberty and fighting for America, because we focus on educating you on the topics that impact kids, schools, and parental rights. Now, one of the hottest topics today overall, I think everywhere, is artificial intelligence, or AI. It's almost impossible to use an app or program or interact with anything today without being told about how that tool's version of AI is now here to make your life so much easier, within the context of that tool, of course. And while that might not be so bad for offloading a task that doesn't really mean that much, maybe like mapping the most fuel-efficient route for an upcoming trip or something along those lines, it does become a problem when you start to outsource your thinking. And the risk of outsourcing is especially high when it comes to AI in education. And of course, for Moms for Liberty, AI in education is a very big concern, not to mention AI's worldview. Now, I'm not talking about capitalism versus communism, the definition of a woman, or whether being polite and punctual actually is a sign of white supremacy. Not worldview like that. The thing is, it's more that with every tool we use comes a worldview shaping how we think, what we question, and even what questions matter. This often happens without even realizing it. It's inherent, unavoidable, and frankly, it comes with any tool we use, even a simple pen and paper. But AI is a particularly powerful tool, which is why we really need to be talking about this. So to help us unpack this and oh so much more, we are joined by Dr. Cooney Horvath. He was previously on for an EdTech interview, and oh my goodness, I have to say I'm so excited to have him back. Somehow I have not heard anyone else presenting this very, very important aspect about AI. And I'll tell you, if you have any concerns or wonder if you should have concerns about AI in education, you don't want to miss this conversation. All right, let's get into it. Welcome back to class. What hit me the most, and this is what I really want to make sure that we talk about, is the AI having a worldview. But it's not just with this idea of, I think that a lot of times people think of worldview as like your values and what's right and wrong, and that is absolutely part of it. But you talk about how it's more than a pedagogy, and I don't know, I guess frankly we could just jump right into that, and you could explain to me, because it was honestly a little bit of a challenge, that I think, because that's the first time I've ever heard it referenced like that, and the fact that it's more than a tool supporting pedagogy, it is a pedagogy. So can you just unpack that? What do you mean by that?
Yes. So it's, and this is tricky. This is the big theme, is every tool in the world has a worldview embedded within it that basically says, when you use this tool, you also must adopt this worldview. And so some simple quotes. This is where, when people say, to a man with a hammer, everything seems like a nail, that's acknowledging that when you pick up a hammer, that highlights certain aspects of the world, eliminates other aspects of the world, determines what questions you can ask, determines what's irrelevant, what answers are meaningful, which aren't. Marshall McLuhan said the medium is the message. He was saying, don't worry about what you're using TV for. Ask what the tool of the TV says about the world and how we exist within it. So when it comes to AI, I think a lot of our debates have been around, how do we use it in school? When is it best to bring it in? When is it not? And I always just thought the more important debate is, no, what is the worldview of the tool itself? What does that tool say about learning, about development, about human beings and our place within the world and where we should belong within it? And I think that's a far more important question, because when you really knock that down, this doesn't just become a tool to support a teacher. This really starts to become a tool that's going to change the definitions of what it means to be an effective school, to the point where I'm not even sure we'll exist if we continue to allow that to kind of come into school. So I don't want to bore your listeners, but do you want me to just kind of go through just a brief kind of
please, that's what I
mean?
No, yeah, because if you can, I'm totally going to turn this over to you. So the key that I had from it, and I'm just looking at my notes for this, is the AI. When you talk about AI and identity and how it helps develop a child's identity, it was almost terrifying to me to read it. Terrifying in like no one's ever thought, I've never heard it presented. Maybe people have thought about this, it's just never presented. So this was genuinely just such a mind-blowing read for me. So please unpack all that, help people understand this.
There are kind of two dimensions then of AI that we got to think about. The first is going to be identity formation. So we'll start with Narcissus, the myth of Narcissus. Everyone, when I say, who did Narcissus fall in love with? Most people say himself. And the answer is no, he fell in love with his reflection. Most people misunderstand that myth. They think it's a myth about self-conceit and the dangers of loving yourself too much. It's a myth about the dangers of externalizing your identity and falling in love with what the world reflects back to you. And so what happens at the end of this myth, in one primary version, when Narcissus figures out that he is not the reflection, he is a person, he chooses to kill himself rather than confront the daunting task of figuring out, who am I? Now, one of the biggest periods of identity formation is always going to be adolescence. It has been forever. That is the time of our life when we are going to externalize our identity more than normal. And we're going to bounce it against our peers, and we're going to bounce it against our teachers and our community. We're going to wear different masks in different situations to see, who are we? Now, that's always been a trait that human beings have done, but it's always been constrained to our community. Along comes the internet. Now, all of a sudden, kids are externalizing their identity, instead of to a dozen other people, to a million other people. And what are they doing? They're putting things online that are neither good nor bad until the world tells them it's good or bad. So like, I'm a teenager, I write a song, I put it online. If it gets 100 thumbs up, must be a good song. If it only gets 10 thumbs up, it must be a bad song. I'm using the outside world to determine what my values are, who I am. It's a very dangerous slope. So during the internet age, that's when we started to say kids are becoming more narcissistic. And we weren't saying they were becoming more self-absorbed or absorbed and loving. We were saying is they were farming out their identity. They were losing their identity formation, depending upon the world to tell them who they should be. And what started to happen around the internet age was culture largely calcified. I mean, you've seen this. If I show you a movie from the 60s and then one from the 70s, you'll be able to tell the difference immediately. If I play you a song from the 80s and then one from the 90s, you got it. If I show you a shirt from the 70s and compare that to the 90s, you're fine. Every generation always had a thumbprint that was their unique identity that they were forming with each other. Internet age, we were farming out our identity so much that this kind of idea of evolving culture created by people just stopped. And this is why if I show you the newest avatar compared to the first avatar from 25 years ago, you can't tell the difference. We've stopped growing. There are no more clothing trends. There are no more film or music trends. We're all just running the same show because we're depending on each other to tell us who we should be. And when that happens, people start chasing trends instead of creating trends. Now, why does any of this matter? Bring on AI. At least during the internet stage, you could say that kids were creating their own stuff that the world was judging them on. They were writing the music. They were asking the world to tell them if it's good or bad. They were painting the paintings that they were asking the world to judge. AI says, don't even do that. I'll write a poem for you. You put it online. Other people will judge it and we'll decide if it's good or bad. So now this identity formation is not simply being farmed out, but the things we are asking the world to tell us whether or not it's good or bad, kids aren't even doing. They're losing even that basic step of identity formation. So what do you get? One of my favorite stories, not my favorite, it's just depressing, but I was talking to a psychologist from a university, and she was telling me about a patient. She had a student. She's like, I'm having the hardest time working with this kid because he is freely admitted. I use ChatGPT to write my college entrance exam. I use ChatGPT to do all my assignments at school. I use ChatGPT to help me write stories and jokes I can tell when I go out with people. She said, this kid wasn't here. There was nobody there. He had no idea who he is, what he wanted to do. He was just farming out his entire identity formation to a machine, and he had nowhere to go from there. And he was starting to collapse down. So this is the first stage of danger when it comes to AI is it's going to stunt our kids' ability more so than the internet ever did to make their own values, determine who they are and what they genuinely want from this world outside of what the world is going to tell them they should be thinking about.
That is legitimately terrifying. I mean, in ways that I would maybe beyond terrifying. It's almost unbelievable. It's almost for any of us who have had that our background just growing up in analog childhood. So it's just so hard to believe that people would do this. But I can say for sure, you see this with kids nowadays, and I think it's far more pervasive than people realize. I do have some hope, I will say. I mean, we've seen a big with graduation speeches this year, right? That was pretty viral. How many people tried to talk about AI being amazing, and the students were really anti-AI. So there's a little bit of hope, but I think that it's going to be that whole thing of boiling the frog. Eventually, it's going to be you're just so used to it that kids just don't care anymore.
And if you go back to our childhood, there were extended periods of solo time. And that's when a lot of that externalization now had to clash with self-internalization. Because what happens is I go home at the end of school, I got about 5 hours where it's me, my brother, my parents, I'm going to go to my room. I got to figure stuff out. And that was always kind of the buffer to all this process. But with the internet, you never really had an off button. It was now 20, you never had that period to yourself. And with AI, it just exacerbates all this. So this comes back to the idea of there will be at some stage, especially during adolescence, kids need to be alone. Like, remember I was thinking about this the other day. We were growing up. We used to imagine what it would be like to be like part of the Truman Show, right? Like you're brushing your teeth and you're thinking, what if someone was actually watching me right now? Like, this is weird. But it was always just a game set 2 minutes in a 2-hour time period where you were by yourself. Now it's not a game. Genuinely, someone is watching you brush your teeth. And as soon as you're done, if they're not watching you now, they're going to watch you afterwards because you're going to jump on the dang thing. Those periods of analog life where you get a little bored, where you have to figure out what you're going to do by yourself, are key to this idea of identity formation, especially during adolescence. And I think we're losing a lot of that as well.
So one of the biggest debates right now is of how we can use AI in education. And I guess I'm curious what with this idea, and just to be clear, when people think about AI, I think it's fair to say that the most common thing that people think of is really like this chatbot generative AI type of experience. So what are your thoughts on it? Is there any use for AI in kids' education?
No, very rarely do I use the B word, ban. I got no problem with it. I think schools ban a lot. We ban drugs, we ban language, we ban certain clothing, we ban things all the time. But I just don't use it all that often. But this is one of them. AI has no place that I've ever seen in school. And the reason for it, and we may have spoken about this before, but it's worth reiterating, is it's the difference between offloading and outsourcing. Offloading, when an expert uses a tool to make their lives easier. Outsourcing is when a novice uses that same tool, and in so doing, they do not develop any abilities because of it. They've done nothing. So my example of this is always, I have my sister-in-law, my wife's sister is fit. She's like a gym rat. She's always working out. Her husband is large. The dude does not work out. He eats. He's a nice guy. They're a funny couple. Anyway, they rented e-bikes one day, those motorized bicycles, to go tour around Melbourne. Now, as always happens, the e-bikes run out of batteries. In her case, it didn't matter. Her bike stopped moving. She just pedaled and rode herself home. Why? Because she was offloading. She could ride the bike. She just didn't want to do it. In his case, when his ran out of batteries, he had to call an Uber to drive him home. He needed another tool to save him from one tool collapsing because he was outsourcing. He had no skills to fall back on, no abilities to actually rely on. Consider AI now. Statistics. I am really good at doing stats, but it might take me, say, 4 hours to do a stats sheet. I can use AI to do it in 4 seconds, but the only reason it works is because my expertise allows me to vet it. As soon as it spits out a number, I can go, yep, that's right, off I go, or no, that's wrong. What else is going on? Did I type that in wrong? It's my expertise that allows me to drive the machine in a way that we call offloading. I'm basically still doing everything. I'm just using that to support it. But the tools we use as experts to offload are never the tools a novice should use in order to learn how to become an expert. When they use the same tool, they will plug in the numbers, it will spit out a thing, they'll copy it, they'll paste it, they'll hand it to me, and they'll get either a thumbs up or a thumbs down. At no point will they understand the material, will they understand the process, will they know what came out, was it good, was it bad? They will have learned nothing. So AI, if it can be said to be anything, is a tool for experts to make our lives easier, to offload. It is not a tool for novices to learn. And I think this is a big concept that's been going around a lot. We have to remember that the tool is not the skill. And we are confusing the two so obviously. AI as a tool helps me demonstrate the skills I have developed. But AI itself is not the skill. It is just a box you type words into. Think of Orson Welles, the great filmmaker. He said, it'll take me a month and a half to teach you how to make a film, but it'll take me decades before you have anything meaningful to say on film. And he was making the point that the tool isn't the skill. I can teach you how to use a computer tomorrow, but that doesn't mean you can have anything to say with it. What you need to do is you need to spend a long time learning about the world, establishing who you are, getting facts, getting data, getting questions, building skills. And now you use the tool to demonstrate your skill, to amplify the skill you are showing. But the tool itself was never the skill. And that's where I think we're making the mistake with ed tech and AI, especially. We're like, train our kids on tech, train them how to use the machine more, train them how to use AI more. Why? It took me 2 minutes to learn how to use AI. It's a box you type words into. You don't need training on the tool. You need training in life so that when you approach the tool, you have a skill that you're using the tool to demonstrate. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, no, I think that's actually, I love that analogy. And in your book, you talk about the idea, let's see, I have the quote here. At no point do they pause to consider who they actually are or what they genuinely value. And it's similar there. Then you also have other stories but that one right there, what I hear there is not taking the time to develop yourself offline. You don't know who you are. So it opens you up to almost being hijacked, not hijacked, but being convinced that you have values and beliefs that you may not actually have because you never took the time to develop that. So that was
dependence. Then forever you're going to be stuck in that kind of dependency loop. My nephew, my brother-in-law's son. I saw that. He was like just the perfect kid of, he would see something online and he would come to the dinner table and spit that out as though that were his opinion. When you could tell he had no clue even what he was saying half the time, let alone whether or not he thought about it. It just became an exercise in mirroring. What does the world say? That's what I'm now going to say. And needless to say, I'm not throwing him under the bus. That guy's around 25 now. He doesn't do anything. I mean, I love him to death as a human being. You can maybe spend 10 minutes with him before you're like, okay, have a good day. I'll see you later, mate. This is what happens when we mistake the externalization of identity for actual identity formation. He doesn't know who he is. He doesn't know what he cares about. What he does know is, what did I just read on Reddit? I'm going to say that as though that matters. And I'm going to say, I'll poke him with a question. Why'd you say that? You know. No, I don't know. That's why I'm asking you. And they don't have any answer because they don't know. And that's the problem.
Well, and I feel like people, when they're challenged to think critically, and I don't know if you have an opinion or knowledge or understanding of any of this, so this is a completely off topic, or I don't know, just curious, anecdotal question perhaps, that if you try to challenge someone on that to get them to think critically about it, it seems to make people angry, especially, I feel like it's mostly with younger people, but Is there a reason for that? Does that have to do with cognitive development, of not having taken that time to establish yourself and figure out your values, and then having to think through it? It's like it pushes them into a defensive mode. Does that make sense?
100%. Yes. So what's going on there is, when somebody attacks your identity, you have two choices. You open up and you learn more, or you shut down and you double down on what you were just doing. So when people ask younger kids, why did you say that? Or have you considered this? They could say, no, I haven't considered that, and go engage with it. Or they could just say, no, screw you. You don't know anything. And now I'm going to entrench myself even deeper over here. In order to engage with a new opinion or new learning, it requires a lot of energy. Basically, it's learning. You now need to go back into learning mode in order to integrate this new information. Learning takes energy. Now, there's a universal law called the law of least effort, which says everything, humans, animals, viruses, stars, everything, if there are two paths to get to an outcome, they will always take the path with least energy. That saves energy, because you need that later. So now you've put me on the spot. You're going to challenge my identity marker. I can either go down the route of learning, which is going to take a lot of energy, or law of least effort, just say, no, you're doubly wrong. I know I'm right. And that's only going to consolidate or solidify my belief even more. So it's a cognitive bias to just basically stick with where you're at, because it's easier for the system. But if you think about it, take it beyond identity formation. That is the difficulty of school. School is nothing more than pushing back against this law of least effort. I have to, for 12 years, 16 years, if you go through university, push you into an uncomfortable realm where your biology is going to push back against me. It's going to say, don't do it. Don't make this happen. Now, who do you think is going to be better at supporting kids for 16 years through the difficult process that is pushing back against your own biology? A human teacher who has been there and done that before and understands the pitfalls and the strengths and all the emotions that go with it? Or a computer that combines words and guesses what you're going to say next? This is why the dropout rate of online learning is about 85% still. As soon as you start, we've done it as adults, as soon as you start online learning, as soon as it gets hard, we quit. Law of least effort. It's a human teacher that will encourage and motivate us to continue through that difficult process that is learning. And that's another reason why humans replace us. You're going to make a big mistake. You're not going to get better learning. You're going to get much more stunted human beings who aren't willing to engage with things.
That is so interesting. I keep forgetting about just how hard, I'm going to totally take age on this one, of just really truly how much of a challenge it is to kids when you think about what we're asking them to genuinely do with this amount of growth and learning over their schooling time. That really is pretty incredible when we think about it. And I think once you hit adulthood, it's like, it wasn't that bad, was it? No, it is. It is a whole lot. But boy, that's an interesting point. And last time I know you told me you acknowledged, and I think this is something that a lot of times people don't like to talk about, that kids will take advantage of the system. Like, to say that they're not going to figure out ways to game a system is just not realistic. And I don't mean that all kids are going to do that, but let's just talk about the science part of it there. If we are designed to go with the least, our bodies are pushing us to go for the least effort. And this tool is generally going to be designed to, supposedly, that's personalized learning, right? So it recognizes where you have a challenge. So you're going to try for the easiest thing over and over, and it's going to think that you need the easiest thing. So kids are really going to be missing out. I mean, personalized learning sounds like a terrible idea.
It is. And the other thing, it hasn't really ever worked, is if you personalize learning according to their preferences, according to their desires, according to what they will demonstrate their needs are, you get very, very slow growth. But when you adapt learning to the content you are trying to teach, and you do it with 30 kids at once, and you have high expectations, and you recognize that, some kids are going to be up here, some are going to be down here. How do we kind of meet everyone where they're at? That's where pedagogy, that's where school becomes incredible. That's where we get growth that you wouldn't normally expect. And that's also where you get coherence. Is we forget that when you hyper personalize learning for everyone learns something else. Now, I don't know if you've been paying attention or not, but when everyone gets their own stream of information, you get hyper isolation amongst individuals, and then social structures start to fracture. This is the problem with social media, is everyone has their own stream. There's no coherent news story where a million people are watching the same story. Everyone gets the story unique to them, and now we wonder why political systems are fracturing, why they are filled and riddled with inconsistencies, why social structures like the law are now starting to fracture. Because when we're all doing our own things, how are we ever going to unify under a set of ideals and accept that? But when you have, and this was always one of the biggest purposes of school, give me a million kids with different narratives of the world. I have 12 years to unify them under a single narrative. This is what it means to be in the US. This is what it means to be a Catholic. This is what it means to be ready for the military, whatever it is. We unify them under a single narrative so they can all live in the same coherent world, so we can build coherence in the society around us. Once we start personalizing learning the same way we personalize social media feeds, we're going to lose any sense of community or coherence there. And we can't be surprised when we see more and more fracturing of our political, our medical, all these social systems. The nuclear family, it's just going to continue to fracture because no one knows what anyone else is talking about half the time. And that's a problem.
That's really interesting, because now I'm hearing, and this is going to sound so conspiracy theory, and it's definitely not. I don't think that this is entirely intentional, but maybe it's just an outcome of it, that it ends up creating more controllable people because of this fracturing and not having a real connection. Anyway, let's not I don't want to go down to a total tin hat theory, but I think that's touching on, I'm wondering if you could just speak to again, I think we talked about this last time, the idea of how there's different types of learning. People like to say, I'm a visual learner, I'm an auditory learner, so last time you broke it down a bit. Can you re-summarize that real quick of why that doesn't necessarily apply?
So those are, biologically, those don't exist, these ideas of learning styles. Every human being learns the exact same way. What we have is learning preferences. I appreciate looking at things. I appreciate listening to things. And that's fine. Preferences aren't bad. The problem is when we do research where we specifically align instruction to each kid's preference, to each kid's learning style, no one learns any better. And in fact, a lot of cases, they learn worse. Where you learn best is when you, align the pedagogy to the content rather than the learners. And the example I always use is, let's say we want to learn how to tango. Do you genuinely think the visual learners are going to learn tango better if I just show them pictures of the tango? And then the auditory learners will learn better if I describe it to them? No, everyone will learn better if you get up and do the tango, whether that's your preference or not. So that's where you realize, because we all learn the same way, there are going to be ways to teach material that are better than other ways to teach that material. And when we align our pedagogy to that, to the material we're trying to teach, what's best for the content, everyone learns better regardless of whether they like it or not.
I think that is such a cool debunking aspect. Also, by the way, after our conversation and reading your books, I have tried to talk to people about this, and I have never faced between this and the cognitive decline, which the data supports in our generation. I have never faced such a challenging opinion to overcome. On the other side, people they don't want to listen, even when I have the data and show them. I'm
for the learning styles stuff.
Yeah,
that is crazy.
It's interesting.
So if you ever just want to nail it, it's called the matching hypothesis. We've been doing this for 20 years. When we match pedagogy to your learning style, do you learn better? And the answer should be yes, if learning styles were real. The answer is always no. You either learn the same or worse. No one actually improves on that. So that's where we kind of realize learning styles aren't a thing.
It is funny how people get, I don't know if it's maybe like because they get so set in their ways then, and I have heard that that's some of the psychology, that once you feel or believe something is a certain way, if someone challenges you too much and it's too far out of where you're comfortable changing your opinion, and then it's an attack on identity and all those things. So
Yeah.
that's a whole nother thing. But I just tell them I have a book that they can read, and then I let you explain it. Yeah. Which I want to go back to a little bit of that coherence and all of that, because in your book, you talk about it with in relation to the idea of information overload, which I think, and getting too technologically or too detailed, using too many terms and confusing people with, I think your analogy that I have in my notes is about the slug antenna. And I fell for that. I thought it was real. I thought it was a real thing as I was reading through this. But when you're, so as I understand it, or as I would, maybe am I explaining it correctly, that you put in so much information, you overwhelm people with all of this, and then they just don't even think to double check things. And then you become the expert, and you can confuse people. Would that be fair? Is that a way to summarize it?
100%. So this is going back to the AI. We said there were two kind of dimensions of what is its worldview. This is the second dimension, that is the worldview of AI. So everyone knows the problem of having too little information. If you don't have enough information, diseases can spread, wars can start. It's a problem. What a lot of people don't acknowledge is the problem of having too much information. Having too much information can be just as bad as having too little, because we end up losing coherence. So I'm just going to take you on a quick little journey. Back in the day, there was not a lot of information in a lot of cultures. And so you need some sort of institution at every stage to organize the information you do have to help people live a coherent life. So back in the day, it would have been things like tribal elders. It would have been things like early churches. These are the places that said, here's the information that matters. Here's what doesn't matter. Here's how it fits together. Here's how it describes who you are as a human. Now, the first big break comes with the printing press. Printing press hits, and all of a sudden, information explodes. Information goes everywhere. And what starts to happen almost immediately, those old institutions shatter because they can't handle the new information overload. Churches start to splinter. The Catholic Church gets a wedge placed right through it. Tribal elders are no longer respected. And what do? We develop new social institutions specifically to help cohere this information. This is things like we were talking about, the Western medical system, a precedence-based legal system. The biggest organizer was always school. School and structured curricula was how we said, there is too much information out here. Here's what matters. Here's what you can ignore. Here's how you're supposed to learn this in order to come out so you can function in this society. Cut now to AI and the internet age, this whole kind of thing. This is our secondary huge explosion of information. Now we have so much information that nobody can seem to cohere anything. Like if you open up a newspaper today or go to your news feed, I promise, here's what you're going to see. You're going to see 4 stories, bang, bang, bang. One will be about a war somewhere. One will be about a cat that got stuck in a tree down the street. One will be about a strange boat that appeared in a regatta in Pittsburgh. One will be about something that happened way over here in Europe. Nothing coheres anymore. So what happens is all these things come together. They're all going to vie for your attention equally. And when everything is equally urgent, nothing is urgent. Nothing becomes important. You don't know how to separate meaning from non-meaning, truth from fiction, because who knows anymore? We've lost all coherence. So the example I always use, yeah, exactly as you were saying, was a lot of people don't realize this, but I mean, why would they? It's a science thing, but that the antenna of sea slugs is actually about 3 to 5 times more. It has more tensile strength than spider web. So spider silk. So people always said, why don't we build like Kevlar vests out of sea slug antennae? But the problem was they were always so small, we couldn't get to them. But luckily, recently, a team of researchers isolated the DNA strand that allows us to grow miles and miles of this antenna now. So we're getting all this new lightweight clothing that has the stopping power of like 3 Kevlar vests. We have changed the world when it comes to bulletproof material. Of course, I just made all of that up. Not a single word that came out of my mouth was true. I don't even know if sea slugs have antennae. But the point is, You believed me. Why? Because in a world where there is so much information, we now no longer have the tools to determine what's right, what's wrong, what's good, what's bad, what's true, what's not. So everything just carries equal valence in our heads. Must be true. Sounds good enough to me. This is where an institution that organizes knowledge becomes the most important thing we have. Now more than ever, with overwhelm of information, we need institutions to double down and say, this is how you need to understand the world. This matters, this doesn't. These are meaningful things, these things aren't. Here is how you progress through your knowledge. Here's how you enter into the society in a functional way. Unfortunately, what we're seeing is all those institutions are now fraying. They can't handle, just like the church collapsed under the weight of the printing press, so too are schools collapsing under the weight of the internet and AI. So what is the underlying worldview of AI? When we let AI into schools, we are tacitly telling the world, one, there is a lot of information and computers are better at parsing and making that information than we are. Two, we are no longer in a position to organize that information in any meaningful way. Ergo, we need the tool to organize the information for us, which means three, we no longer need to exist here. AI can do our job better than we can because we can't handle the information and we don't know how it's supposed to be parsed. Now, that sounds absurd and obscure, but there was a press conference not 2 days ago where somebody was asking, I think it was Anthropic, your data centers are polluting our water. They're contributing to global warming. They're pumping stuff into the air. How are you going to address this? And their answer was, I shit you not, the AI will solve that for us. That's why we're doing this. We're poisoning the water now because AI will tell us how to clean it later. But if we don't have AI, we'll never figure it out. That is the exact point I'm trying to make, that when we have a tool, we adhere to its worldview. And the worldview of AI is, you are a weak computer, human beings. I am a strong computer. You are too subjective to get anything done. I am objective. I will solve your problems because I am a superior version of you. That is not true. Isn't it crazy that people don't recognize that we invented AI. It didn't invent us. We invented computers. It didn't invent us. So already we're above it. But B, all the information AI is using comes from us. All the answers we need are here. When you let people cook, we are good. I mean, here, I'm just top of my head. You ready? The aqueducts, the entire city of Venice, the entire rail network of the United States, refrigeration, basically the entire skyline of New York City, going to the moon, the atom bomb. These are things human beings did without a single computer in sight. When we allow ourselves to think we are unstoppable, are we perfect? No. Are we infallible? Nah. Are we subjective? Yeah, but all of that feeds into what we can do. Now we bring in a tool where we are basically saying, we can't solve it. Only that can. We will never be able to cure cancer. Only that machine can. And that's the worldview of that machine, that you are an idiot and that without me, you will never progress beyond where you're at right now. And that is complete nonsense. But that's why I say, when schools let that tool in, what are you saying? Not how are you using it? We use it in English, but not in math. What does the tool itself say about the structure of information, who human beings are, and what the role of school should be? And none of that aligns with what we've historically thought school should be doing. So when you let the tool in, don't be surprised when it starts to erode our very identity and reason for existing.
Well, that wasn't terrifying at all. No, I'm kidding. Like, no, I think that's articulated so well. Again, that's part of, I think it was in your book that you were talking, what you just said there. If not, then I definitely got it from something you inferred.
It's all in there somewhere. It's peppered throughout.
No. I mean, this next point of that, I think you actually cited like the because of what you were just talking about, intelligence, that now there's a real concern of whether or not there's even going to be enough like smart people in the world to be able to solve some of these future problems. And if it wasn't you who said it, you might have said it on one of the interviews that you've been on, I just was so taken aback by that. But that's really what I'm hearing, and is the truth. And unfortunately, I do think that there are a lot of people who still believe in human ingenuity and the ability to, push ourselves and try to grow. But it's kind of similar, I think, to the debate about putting little boys or anyone with ADHD on medication instead of letting them be creative geniuses. And that's a debate. And I'm not trying to get into the debate of whether or not people should be on ADHD or medication or whatever. But there's certainly no question that, would we have an Einstein? Would we have Mozart if they didn't have the ability to just go off and be super creative? And so what you're saying there, I think, is, I mean, unfortunately, you see a lot of people willing to go into the convenience and comfort of offloading and or outsourcing, I guess. Maybe it turns into outsourcing. That it's sad. That's really sad
straight outsourcing. And that's all kids are ever going to do with AI. Everyone's like, they could use it to be deeper thinkers. Name one person who's using AI to be a deeper thinker. Law of least effort. Everyone uses AI to cheat. Nobody uses AI to refine an email. They use AI to write the damn email. And if they use it to refine it, they don't take one bit here and then what do you think about that? They just copy and paste the dang thing. Why? Law of least effort. The problem is done. Go forward. So you're exactly right. This is going to stop development. And I think that's a key thing. A lot of people think about these higher order skills like creativity and critical thinking and communication abilities, all these things we want from our kids. A lot of people think that sits over here. You've got skills. Over here, you've got knowledge. And when we bring the two together, we will flourish. They don't realize that, no, these higher order skills aren't separate from knowledge. They emerge from knowledge. They are not separate to it, and we use it on the facts. They literally come out of the facts we have. And I'm not talking about facts you can access online. I'm talking about the knowledge you have embedded within your biology. So as my favorite example of this is, there's an exam called the PISA exam. In 2018, what it does is it tests hundreds of thousands of kids around the world on reading, science, and math. And we compare countries to see which educational systems are performing better, which aren't. In 2018, they also gave kids a test of creativity, creative ideation, innovation, divergent thinking, convergent thinking, all that. Now, that year, the one country killed everyone when it came to learning, reading, math, knowledge. One country knew more stuff than everyone else. No surprise, it was Singapore. Why? Because they have the most rigorous academic system. Surprise, surprise. But surprisingly, one country killed everyone on creativity. One country was so much higher than everyone else on creativity that no one was even in the ballpark. They were about a half a standard deviation above everyone else. Who was it? Singapore. No one saw that one coming. Why? Because creativity emerges from knowledge. Because these kids knew more stuff, when we now asked them to be creative, they were able to be more creative. In fact, when we aligned knowledge scores with creativity scores that entire year, they correlated at 0.92, which is basically perfect. How much your kids knew would tell you almost perfectly how creative they were able to be. So once you start to realize that these things we want from our kids come from knowledge, come from understanding the world, that's when we really got to say, okay, what tools, what methods are best for learning? What tools are going to make sure our kids know more about the world in a structured, concrete way that will allow them to be creative as they get older? And that, as we've seen, is largely, we were doing that better in the 90s and the noughts than we are today. And it's largely because of the tools we're trying to use to make the whole process easier or simpler. We've got to go back to what we know is best for development.
I think I'm so 100% with you on that. I think it's really interesting that people try to devalue knowledge, like actual things to know. And it's, I guess, like theoretically and academically, it sounds so wonderful, but it's just not real. This ties right into when you're talking about things out, I guess, the content. So one of the things that you also talk about is the idea of human thought and human thought being represented in language. This was very interesting to me. But then you say, if it can't be put into words, because there's things that can't be, then it can't be thought. And that was shocking. Made me think, is that why there was such a problem with AI having the ability to create pictures and images for so long?
No. See, the point I'm trying to make is there specifically is that is going to be a tenet of AI, is because AI runs on language, large language models. It's baked into the very thing. A belief is that if it can't be verbalized, it can't be thought. And so that's where a lot of people think, okay, well, cool. That's the tool says if you can't put it into words, it's not real. But you get to just look back in history. Basically, the entire history of art is recognizing that there are ineffable things that can't be said that must be expressed in other ways. I have to dance this. I have to paint this. I have to sing this. I have to feel this. And all of that stuff is key to our cognition. Here's where you realize a lot of people think that we are a brain inside of a body. You are not a brain just hitching a ride. You are a body. You are as much your finger as you are your heart, your spleen, your lungs. You're not your brain. You are all of this, which means all of those things, emotions, intuitions, movement, breathing, these things contribute as much to our cognition and our identity as anything else we're going to do. Now, along come LLMs, and they basically say if it can't be put into words, it doesn't exist. Everything else is just subjective slop. So give me your words, and I will be the most objective arbiter of what's going on and what matters. And then hopefully you see, no, all that thing we're calling subjective slop, that humanism, is what leads to insights that AI will never have, is what leads to understanding and invention that we will never be able to verbalize to an AI enough that it can make sense of it. It's what makes us better than computers, not what makes us worse than computers. So the more I think we can lead into that, we call it embodied cognition. You are not just a computer brain. You are embodied. You are all of this. And how you are holding your hand, change position, you will think differently. How you are, if you're standing versus sitting, that will contribute. Are you full? Are you hungry? What are you feeling? All of this is part of your cognition as well. And rather than running away from that and then assuming that's our weakness, we lean into it and we recognize, no, that's our superpower. And that's what makes us unique.
It's funny because I feel like I'm going to date myself with this stuff, but I think of movies where it seems like that's the whole point of the movie, and that's part of what we get, right? So it'll be things like, I want to say Michael might have been one where he was an angel, but he wanted, or no, the bishop's wife. That's a really old one, I know. But where he wanted to, he's an angel that can't get the human connection, like just wants that thing that's not really able to be, couldn't be written about for sure. And we even see it in futuristic movies about machines where the machines want to be human, right? Like that. This is something that we've seen before, and it's losing that humanity. Ooh, man.
I mean, doesn't it strike anyone as odd that it required literally every piece of information we have on the internet and years of training for a machine to do something that a 5-year-old can do after learning several numbers and extrapolate to the rest of the world? That's not because we have better computing process or more information. That's because we are inherently different than what we think. And we're just stuck in this kind of, we talk about the brain like it's a computer. I do all the time, but that's a metaphor. A metaphor isn't real. We're just using that because it's the best way to help other people understand what we're thinking about. But people are taking the metaphor realistically, and they genuinely think humans are just computers. We're not computers. What are you talking about? A computer is mimicking us, but that's such a small portion of us and who we are. We just don't know how to do the rest yet. But I think you're right. We don't want to go down that trap of assuming that Spock versus Kirk, that just knowledge is somehow facts is the secret. There's more to it. Knowledge is our stock and trade. We don't need all of it. That's where we can now emerge our creativity and do stuff that tech will never be able to do. But again, we still need our basic knowledge to make that even happen.
Man, so I'm checking my time and realizing we're already coming up close to time, which is, I swear, anytime I talk to you, and fun little fact, by the way, I had my daughter edit our conversation last time, and she was like, Mom, I can't cut anything out. This is so good. There's just so much to learn. So you do a wonderful job of reaching all ages. And I just so appreciate you breaking this down in such an interesting way, because that's part of what we need to do is get people to realize how important it is, and you have to be engaging about it. And you're very good at conveying that information. I want to slightly positively maybe switch us back to, positive, more upbeat, or just interesting. So you talk about the idea before of outsourcing versus offloading. And so then when you were saying an expert can use it, that's something that a novice never would. So in schools, obviously, the student's an expert, or the student's the novice. So, but does that mean that we could have times that a teacher is able to outsource things? So would that be an okay place for some use of AI, or is it still not something that we could use?
It's whenever I talk about AI in school or any tech in school, I'm just talking about student facing tech. If you're a teacher and you want to use it, go to town, do your thing. So long as you already have the skill. If you're using it to offload, fine. But remember, a key thing to remember with us as teachers is we have 3 levers we can use to make a difference in our kids' life: lesson design, assessment design, feedback. That's it. And us as being human beings, emotions, fine. But I'm talking about pure cognitive learning. Lesson design, assessment design, feedback. If you farm any of those 3 things out to AI or to a tool, you're probably shooting yourself in the foot, because now you are losing one of the only levers you have to actually make a difference in these kids' life. So in that instance, like, by all means, if you are really, really good at lesson design and you're just using AI to say, give me a new idea or something, maybe you can make that work. But if the second that becomes the interface between you and the kids, you're using AI to give feedback, you're using AI to ask questions, stop right there, because now you are not doing your job as a teacher.
Can I ask you to get just a little nerdy with me on that? Because as someone who's not a teacher, what would an example of lesson design or assessment design be that could be farmed out? Because to a non-teacher, I would probably have thought that would be something that you could utilize AI for. So what
you could, by all means, you could. But so what's going to happen is, so there's one of the biggest drivers of learning we have is called formative assessment. Now, bear with me. So we have summative assessment and formative assessment. Summative assessment is that final test you take. It's the summation of everything you've learned. You've got one chance to show me what you know. You get your letter grade, you're done. Formative assessment are those little tasks we're doing all day, every day, or these little quizzes that are asking us to do things. Formative assessment is one of the biggest drivers of learning and education we know. So the guy who coined the term formative assessment wanted to figure out why. What is the mechanism? Why is it so good for learning? He spends 10 years doing his research, and he comes back and he says, I found something no one expected. The reason why formative assessment is so good, we thought it would be for the kid, because the kid's getting feedback, the kid's seeing where they're at, and that's a part of it. The primary reason it's useful is for the feedback it's giving the teacher. The teacher asks a question, gets an answer. That tells the teacher exactly what they need to do to adjust their teaching to make sure the kid can get to that next stage. So he no longer uses the term formative assessment. He says, I wish I wouldn't have said that. He calls it responsive teaching. He says the mechanism is the feedback it's giving the teacher. So now, when I say you've got 3 options, lesson design, assessment design, and feedback, those are the 3 things that drive formative assessment, responsive teaching. Those are the 3 things that give you the information you need to know what to do with your kids next. So let's say I'm teaching Hamlet. I could use AI to say, what's a fun way to teach Act 1 of Hamlet? Well, in so doing, what I've just done is completely ignore who are my students, what do I know, what do I need them to know, where am I trying to take them? I'm just assuming a fun lesson where we act out Hamlet with our puppets is good. No, we teach for a reason. If you know Hamlet, you know what you need your kids to know. What is the best way to teach them that? Now let's go to assessment design. Can you formulate 10 questions about Hamlet? It can absolutely do that. But the only reason we ask questions as teachers is because I need to know what you know so that can feed back and help me teach next. So if I don't invent the questions myself, what good are they? I mean, that's what I always tell teachers. I'm like, if you don't know what you need your kids to know from a lesson, Don't teach that lesson. Go back to the drawing board. You should know exactly what questions you're going to ask because you're already clear on what it is we're trying to achieve. And then feedback is the same thing. When I give feedback to students, that's helping push them down that next level. But that only works because I know exactly what I'm saying, when I'm saying, how I'm saying it. If AI gives them feedback, what did that give me? So if we assume the best driver of a kid's learning in schools is teacher practice, teacher responsiveness, then teacher responsiveness hinges on lesson design, assessment design, and feedback. That's why we say those three things. Don't farm those out. If you ever let tech interfere between you and those three things, you're not going to have the information you need to do your job. By all means, yeah, use AI to formulate field trip slips or write letters to parents. All that stuff is irrelevant, but do not let it interfere with those three steps. That's what we're here to do.
So I'm going to restate this in a way that would be purely a parental way, and tell me if I've understood you correctly. So an example of just in parenting that I would see this is if I'm trying to get my kid to be able to explain, I don't know, why they need to do their laundry, let's just say, and they're like, oh, because the hamper is full is the answer. And I realize, wait a second. Okay. So that's a really general question that I've asked is, why do you do your laundry? As opposed to, you don't understand the bigger picture, which is you don't have any clothes to wear because they're all dirty and you don't want to wear dirty clothing because that's gross. So now I have had feedback and recognize I need to change the question, rephrase it, maybe teach them something else because they didn't pick it up in the first lesson, whatever those. And so now we have this cycle. Is that a fair, like, super basic summary? Okay.
Because as a parent, you know what you want your kid to know. You are gunning for her to say, I do laundry every 3 days because otherwise my clothes are too dirty. I have nothing to wear. It's stinky, whatever it's going to be. And what formative assessment is you now saying, hey, why do we do the laundry? Because now you're going to get feedback when she says, because the laundry basket's full, exactly as you said. That's my feedback to go, okay, no, what's the next step I need to get you to this endpoint, which is, here is why we do laundry. Nailed it. And that's all we're doing in school. And so people try and say, well, that means you have to have a pretty clear outcome in education. And the answer is, yeah, we do. I mean, I've been teaching for a long time. I've had thousands of students. I say I've been surprised maybe 3 times. And it's not because kids are decrepit or meaningless. It's because they're kids. We recognize that they are not at the adult stage where we would genuinely expect intuitive leaps of knowledge and intuition and growth. We are trying to help them get there in the safest, fastest, easiest way, most effective way possible that we can. And so that means when I assign my kids an essay, write me something about the brain, XYZ, I already know what they're going to write. Why? Because I didn't assign the essay because I genuinely am curious as to what you're thinking. I assigned the essay because that's a venue through which I can see whether or not you're piecing the ideas together right to get the basics. Because if you don't have the basics, we can't do anything more. But yeah, if you get it right in that essay, I'm going to give you another essay, which I already know what you're going to write. Wink. Because I'm guiding you down a path of understanding. So it doesn't mean that it makes school less creative or no. What it means is they're kids, and we need to get them to the stage where their creativity genuinely flourishes. And that means, yeah, I know why I do everything when I do it. And very rarely will I ever be surprised. 3 times I have been. It does happen. Every once in a while, a kid does something, you're like, whoa, where the heck did that come from? And it is incredible, but that's not why we do what we're doing.
Okay, so now let's get a little scary because, I mean, first of all, we have an AI guideline policy with Moms for Liberty, and that is Moms for Liberty. This is my statements right now are not Moms for Liberty sanction or like representative. I am 100%. If we could remove all AI from our life and not have any of it, I would happily do that tomorrow. I recognize that is not going to happen given all of our apps and the ways that it's integrated into society in so many other ways. Anyway, one of the scariest things that we have seen and the super techs get really excited about is this idea of AI replacing teachers. And we see that kind of in alpha schools. And not just alpha schools. I know there's other schools as well that do this and talking about using AI. So AI is really the teacher, at least for a portion of it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know if I have a question other than like, what are your thoughts on that? What's the problems with that? That's probably a massive question, but I see all
It's
sorts of problems based on this
it's all a
conversation.
sales pitch. I'm not going to name any schools by name because
Sorry.
it's
Yeah, sorry about
no,
that.
no, no. That's you can. I've just the last time I said the A word, I got death threats, so I've stopped
Oh,
using that name. They take that stuff really seriously. There are so many biological reasons to argue why that's a bad thing, and the data is starting to come back that realistically it isn't working. At least not the way they're saying that it's working. Not least of which is that humans have evolved to learn from humans. Some of our biggest drivers of learning are biological resonance mechanisms. So every animal can learn, well, not every animal, but a lot of animals can learn by watching other animals do stuff. But only human beings learn incredibly well by watching other human beings do stuff because we start to do what's called internal mimicry. In a very real sense, if I'm watching you perform a task, it's virtual reality for me. My brain is treating it as though I was doing that task. Learning starts to get really deeper. So this means when you have a human teacher, learning will necessarily flourish than compared to times you don't, simply because of the resonance between the teacher and the students. Our biologies will start to synchronize. We will start to learn more. So one of the biggest mistakes people made is they thought teachers were important for what they knew. Well, AI knows more than a teacher, therefore AI will be a better teacher. No, we're important not only for what we know, but we're also important for who we are, literally, biologically. That is part of the learning process. That also allows us to tap into and resonate with our kids, which means now I can read my kids' emotions. I can read the vibe in the room. All of this feeds back to me and determines how I'm going to say the very next sentence. None of that can be read by AI. So that's why, like, what do people say? The biggest booms of assets of an AI tutor are: one, it knows a lot of stuff. Woohoo! So does an encyclopedia. Two, it is highly adaptive. You know what else is adaptive? Humans. That's what we do. Teachers are wickedly adaptive. But unlike AI, which can only adapt to input, a teacher can adapt to silence. If a kid doesn't say something, we can adapt to that. We can adapt to a look in a kid's eye. We can adapt to the tone of the kid's voice when they say something. The amount of degrees of freedom we have for adaptation as teachers is so much greater than the type of adaptation an AI machine will do. You got it right, here's a harder question. You got it wrong, here's an easier question. It's not even in the ballpark. So it's such a cute story. It's such a fun way to sell more stocks and get people richer on AI. It just has nothing to do with reality of human learning or what we're actually doing in schools.
that is wow. Oh my God. I was just thinking of tone and silence and and I'm sure eventually we'll get to a place where they'll pick up inflection and have something programmed in to do that, and there's going to be some version of trying to mimic human capabilities that have existed for millennia. But sure, machines are going to be better at it than us, right? But that is really, really interesting because that, I mean, I tell my kids all the time, that is not something that you put in, well, when they were growing up in particular, that's not something you put on a text. You're going to call your friend and say that, because the tone could be interpreted and completely change the meaning of what you're saying. And I was just imagining an AI tutor, input receiving, well, what do you mean by that? Well, what do you mean by that? And like all the different ways that you could say just the sentence, what do you mean by that? And
Yeah.
how that would completely transform the question. Huh. That's
That,
crazy to think of.
and when they talk about embedding this stuff into AI, what you got to remember is this is another one of those examples of it will take all the data we've ever had and a decade to get AI even an inch closer to what a 5-year-old does completely naturally. This is humans being humans. And when we allow ourselves to be humans and learn from other humans, it's what we do. We don't need to mimic it with a machine. That's why we call it artificial intelligence. Give me real intelligence. Give me human embodied intelligence. That is, especially when it comes to learning. Now, when it comes to performing, I don't know. Maybe AI will help you code faster. So far as I can tell, the data says it doesn't, but who knows? I think it's all just been, and I don't know why anyone bought it. I got to be blunt on that one. How many more times Are we willing to allow ourselves to be lied to by big tech and believe it and then be shocked when it wasn't true? As soon as AI came out, I posted a video on my YouTube saying, this is nonsense. Buckle in, everyone. This is just the next level of nonsense. And it seems like that's coming true. And now we have like people saying we're going to build data centers in space. We literally do not even have the science for that. Yeah, you're telling me, and people are buying it. And you gotta stop letting big tech lie to you. They are going to say anything to make their product look good and make money and scare the daylights out of you. Did you like when they talk about AI taking your job? It will not. It may have for a second, but I promise you they're going to come right back to you. Because in 1966 was the first time people started saying AI is going to take our jobs, when they invented the first AI therapist. They said therapist, that's no longer, if you study therapy, you're dead. Sorry, because they had a chatbot in 1966 that could do therapy. There are more human therapists alive today than ever before. Why? Because these things are not humans. They are mimicking us, and in so doing, they will always be weaker versions of us, and they will never reach the outcomes we reach, which means they cannot do for us what we want or expect from each other. So stop believing the tech stuff. When they come out and say, and maybe they could be right, but now start demanding data. When they come out and say, I built a product that can do X, Y, Z, don't say, great, let's buy it. Say, sweet, show me the proof. And if they have it, now we can talk, but they're not going to have it because it's all just pie in the sky nonsense.
Yeah, no, I think that is one of the biggest takeaways that I've had from this, and from your book too, is the fact that EdTech failed us so greatly. Social media has failed us so greatly, and it's just this: why do we keep falling into this delusion that this new innovation is going to be so great? Why don't we just learn? It's almost like when, as a parent, you try to tell your kids something like, don't touch that hot whatever. And they're like, I don't know. I think I'll be fine if I touch the hot pan. And you're like, okay, fine. I've told you 27 times. Like, if you want to touch the hot pan, then figure it out for yourself. And that sort of is what it feels like we're doing, which is crazy because we're adults. So we should be learning better. Okay. One more question for you. Because we are already at time, and I could talk to you forever because this is just absolutely fascinating. And this one, I'm just curious. Maybe it would be something read too much into, but you mentioned that schools, and earlier you're talking about schools being the kind of key institutions that were helping to organize society and like put coherent, like give us all teaching people like structure, and that makes sense, I think. But you talk about schools needing to be the meaning makers again. I think a lot of parents would feel like they should be the meaning makers first. I'm just curious, why do you say schools versus families being the meaning makers?
Only because I work in schools, but remember, schools historically haven't really started till kids are about 6 or 7. So by all means, parents, families should be the initial meaning makers. What school is helping us make meaning of is social organization. What is not even the language, but what are the terminologies you need to make sense of the world you are in? What is the political structure of the world you are about to inherit so you can become an informed citizen here? So by no means are we talking about, no, that's not all schools, but most schools will just be organizers and meaning makers of math, of science, of reading and comprehension, those things. When it comes down to deeper values, that should most certainly has historically been the family. But with that said, I think there are you've got Catholic schools, you've got military academies, you've got art academies, which are going to push into those deeper realms. But I think it's interesting that for all the talk of problems in education and debates we've had, you've never really heard of an educational crisis in any of those schools: a Catholic school, a military academy, art school. Why? Because they are very clear on the kind of person they are trying to build. They have very much structured themselves around artists must blank, soldiers must blank, Catholics must blank. And that's whereas public schools, it's very scary because we're trying to serve every master. This is what happens when you try and serve a society. Some people believe A, some people believe Y, some people believe Z. Let's do it all. You can't. At some point, you've got to throw your flag in the sand and say, who are we trying to build? What type of human being are we trying to create? And unless we lock that down, we will always be at the whim of the changing world. But if we come back and say, look, school exists, like Thomas Jefferson, school exists to create an informed citizenry who can contribute to voting in a meaningful way in their society. That gives us a very clear sense of what I should teach, what I shouldn't teach, what matters, what's irrelevant to this topic. How should I structure this? How will we know when they're ready? We have to go back to saying, who are we trying to create? What is the deeper function of school? What narrative are we using to drive why we do what we do? And then that's going to help us out. And what we might find, and I got no problem with this, is that might fracture schools a bit, where you will have some schools that say, we're here to build kid X. And you will have other people say, no, I want to go to a school that builds kids Y. Well, cool, that's a school over there. You might fracture the larger education system, but at least each segment of it now will have a very clear reason for being and can align pedagogy and development accordingly. I think it becomes way more effective that way. So by all means, the big stuff, the meaning makers, that's going to be family. But when it comes to the stuff, calculus, I don't know how much meaning you're going to make of that. Some of us, I can't. I don't do calculus. That's where hopefully school can step in and say, I'll make meaning of that for you.
Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. That really does. And all right, I am so sorry that we took you so over time. I so appreciate you breaking all this stuff down. And I want to give you a second, if you could, please talk about your new book, where people can get it, and also an incredibly exciting opportunity that we were told about of a virtual presentation you're doing with Jonathan Haidt as well. If you want to talk about that.
Yeah, so there's a new version of the Digital Delusion coming out next week, August 18th. So it's got like 25% more book. It's mostly just new data. So if you want more data, there it is. And then for anyone who does a pre-order of the book, you get a free invite to, we're going to do an hour. Me and John are just going to sit down and talk about the future of education and tech childhood together. And it'll be the first time me and John Haidt have ever sat down and bullshitted together. So I'm looking forward to it. I think it could be pretty dang cool. So if you want to know more, just, the book, you can find it on Amazon. You can find it on Penguin, Random House, all the places. And then, if you get the pre-order, you should, I think they just send out a code and you're good to come play with us.
Yep, that's what we were told, that if you get the pre-order, there's a code that goes with it. And then we have a site that we've sent out to our folks. We're sending to our members, and we'll link to that so that people can come and join the conversation. And I definitely want to see that conversation. Like I said, I could talk to you all day about this stuff. So getting to hear you two talk about this, I think is going to be a fascinating discussion.
It'll be cool. What if we don't get along? We've never actually just sat down and talked. What if we're like, you know what? I don't like you, young man. Like, who knows? This could be fireworks. It could be incredible.
I mean, well, frankly, then it could be even more fun. It would be very interesting to see, but I have a hard time with what you guys talk about or both write about. I think that it'll be fascinating.
I think we'll be pretty cruisy together. Well, thank you so much for letting me do this again. And it's awesome to see you again.
Absolutely. We really appreciate having you here. Okay, I don't know about you, but I am more motivated than ever to ditch the digital and return to analog wherever possible. Now, remember, we're not saying that AI can't be used ever. It is a tool, and it certainly has its place of usefulness, just like a hammer is very useful hammering in nails. But unless you're an expert with the ability to critically review the output and ensure accuracy, you should be wary of using it at the risk of outsourcing your thinking. So take time to think about some of these deeper concepts. Like Dr. Jared said, that is learning. And learning is growing, which means it's hard. And after all, we do have the term growing pains for a reason. But it's more important than ever that we take the time to formulate who we are offline first. What are your values? What are your beliefs? What is most important to you? And not just because of the thumbs up count or because someone else said it. And then we need to help our kids formulate those values, beliefs, their core being as well. If you like this episode, please hit like and subscribe. But most importantly, share this with another friend or parent. And then go buy his book, Digital Delusions. We'll link to it in the description. And of course, you can get it pretty much wherever books are sold. It is full of knowledge that pretty much all of us need to hear. And after all, as James Madison said, the advancement and diffusion of knowledge is the only guardian of true liberty, which of course is the mission of M4L Academy. Thanks again for joining us today. Class dismissed.